Okie dokie. What? No one's there? That's fine.
Yeah.
I'm sure I sent people a link. Clicked because it's an extra day, so people might not have been scheduled for it. Click. Well, there's 6 people registered.
Yeah.
So at least somebody's going to show up. Maybe. If not, it's not a problem. It's broadcasting, right?
Yeah.
Hey, everybody. Since this is like an added day, we've only got a few folks,
which is totally fine.
But we're gonna start.
He's gonna get the recording.
And then we're gonna do an hour. So we're gonna do an hour today, and then we'll do an hour. Finish up everything and show and tell. Which is also unscheduled and added. But the more I show you, the more money you get out, right?
In the end, right? So who's complaining about that?
Let's look at where we're at. We're gonna attack the purple one today. I'm gonna show you. Oh my gosh, dogs! They're like so good the whole day, and then they go crazy. Taylor, stop it! You want to go in your boo box? And see, I just couldn't not bring everybody here today, so we're like full up with dogs. I'm going to show you kind of how I started hooking this kind of stuff on. I started a little bit yesterday, and I want to show you what I said you can also kind of like cross stitch from the back. I'll do a little bit of this in black so you can see what I'm talking about. Taylor, come here. I'm going to put you in the box. We're trying to have a class, but you can't be left at home because you go crazy. So I'll kind of show you where we're going with that. But really, the majority that's left on this bodice is that we've got to hook the center front together, put the last few appliques on it, and pipe the top and bottom. And I'm going to show you on the fairy doll bodice kind of how I lay down piping. And Jared's got a bunch of it piped already. And then let's look at the top plate. Deborah has got this sucker done, and it's looking super, super great. And right, so yesterday I had said, let's pin these white flowers on every other spot, but it looked like a vagina. So we decided to go for all squiggles, which doesn't look, it looks more like a brain. So that's better. So we've got brains inside of flowers. And I'm going to show you today how we made all these ruffles. So let's just, let's look at the pattern for this one more time, kind of as a review. And then I'll show you how we made all those cute ruffles. And it's still going to get like bows and stuff in between the things. And we also went for this skinny gold trim around them. She finished off the edge with this skinny gold that has like a little blue, periwinkle blue in it, because the extra braid of pink also made it look like a Georgia O'Keeffe painting. But now it looks back like a fluffy 70s flower Easter egg thing, which is what we were going for. And then if you'll remember, we looked at this top plate, which is an oval. Do I need to move? Just point it at this. We started with an oval, so we used my hip thing, and we made an oval a smidge bigger than the girl's hip, because it's easier to ease just a tiny bit of this on to the tutu or the basque, rather than wishing it was a little bit bigger. But then what's weird is I see lots of times folks will make an oval, and then they'll make a circular top plate where the motif or the trim reaches to the edge of the tutu. But what happens is if you have an oval and then stick a circle on the outside, your distances from the hip to the outside edge aren't right. So if you kind of look at our little teardrop things that are going on, you'll see that there's like a big one, a narrow one, and 2 medium ones. We just embraced that that's what happens when we put an oval in the middle and then have each the same distance out to each edge. So we were more concerned that it's the right distance from her high hip to the outside than I was concerned about getting all of the petal centers or each petal to be exactly the same. So what I did was I drafted a petal for the outside, for like the side seam petal, and then I drafted my center front petal, and then I laid those two over each other and kind of split the difference to make the side, so that when it's all done, it's a smidge uneven, but it's making the illusion that it's not uneven at all. So hopefully that makes sense. Then these cutout ones is where Deborah got her pattern to make the little squiggles in the middle. She knew that that's what the shape was for each of those. And then to make them, Taylor, why? Come here. Sorry, everybody. That's just Travis yelling at dogs. She like chills out the whole day until we stop paying attention to her. Like a kid. I don't know what it is. But the other thing to look at on here is, see, I've got more gaps. So these are my placement lines for the ruffles. My gap gets bigger because we want the ruffles to fan out at the bottom, and then the placement lines get closer because I want them to come together up at the waist. So that's what's going on with that. Let's take a peek at the bodice and set up a little bit of more stuff on the bodice here. So right now, and for the new folks, we do have a couple new folks. I will just send you the Facebook video link for how we use the sewing machine to put the hooks and bars on. And we usually put a row on the center back and then a row on either side. I'll send you that link rather than putting another hook and bar on by machine. So Jared has got his decorative folds on, and he's got the piping laid down for his neck and his hem. And then the next step is going to be to trim out some of the bodice and then press the piping over and start cross stitching it. So that will be the next thing that happens on the bodice. But let's look at the center front and see where we're at on here. So I'm going to lay down piping on each side. So we're making this look kind of like a vest that is going over a fake blouse. So I'm going to pipe each side of the vest. Actually, maybe I want to pipe it with is there any of that dark stuff left? That might be cute. We've got this dark silk. Yeah, that'll work. So actually, I'm going to pipe. We've got this other color teal. So even though, right, our back shoulder is one color, and then we're going to put a different color in the front, nobody's going to look. So I'm going to pipe these two sides of the center front with this darker silk so that there's a little bit of contrast between the two pipings. And then we made tubes. Jared cut 1 3/4 strips of the same silk and serged it and turned it inside out. And that's what we're going to use to make our crisscross down the front. So I'm going to lay out the crisscross right now and just kind of show you how I set that up. So as always, we love the buttonhole spacer because you can space all kinds of stuff with it. So I'm going to just start. And I don't know how many crisscrosses I want really until I just do it. So I'm going to mark out 6 spots. And I'm staying inside of my top and bottom edge, right? We don't want them to run into the top and bottom edge. What did I say? 6. I got to find 6 again. Then these spacers have a little bit of play. So even though I've got the spacer, I'm kind of like looking across to see if my mark is where I think it is. Maybe I put 3 o'clock in a different time zone. Click back to the webinar. Does it say Central Standard Time? Okay, it's all right. It's Christmas too. Everybody's out shopping and stuff. So now that I've got this marked on there, I can start to play and see how crisscrossy I want my crisscrosses. And let me grab some scissors. I'm going to cut them off a little big in case I end up moving them around. And with the first one, I'm just skirting right to the top of the blouse. And since there's going to be a bow up there, I am going to say that that is all right. You can also put little loops in these spots and actually just lace it up. But since we're going for a real staged looking costume, we're just gonna really control absolutely everything about it. That is gonna look really super cute. The other thing to kind of watch is like, is the center staying in the center? And if it's not, you can kind of fudge stuff a little bit too. Oh, and really, do I want to make sure that like this one is over? Then do I want to do it under on the next one? Like you can decide. Well, at least the dogs are playing now. They're about to knock the camera down. You can decide how elaborate you want to get with this stuff. And I think I'll pin one more on, but I think we've got the right amount of bumps or the right amount of crisscrosses going. And then a little stitch in the center of that's all right too if you're worried about whatever she's doing and getting caught up in it. Her hand probably shouldn't be there, but you never know what's going on with these ballerinas sometimes. So even though this is going for like fairy doll, this would be a cute La Fille del Mal Garde or whatever. What's that ballet? The Wayward Sister. I think it's called The Wayward Sister. Or the Homely Girl. It's something. It's like about a girl. She's either lost or homely or something. Okay, so that's what we're going to continue down with the front. But right now, let me cut some piping because we are going to pipe over the center front of this. Actually, the other thing you could do if you wanted is to pipe. Oh, Everett's in her cage now. You could pipe one side of, you could pipe like the straighter part of it in one color and then switch your piping for the neck edge. But we're going to just do it all in this darker green because it just looks cute in the front. So let's cut some piping. And then I'm using a cording foot on the industrial machine, which is like a great substitute for a zipper foot. If you don't, if you have an industrial machine, you can use a cording foot. And it has a channel, so you can just lay the piping right down. Here, Everett, I think Taylor wants to go into her cage for a little bit. So why don't we swap? You go in there. You take a nap or bark some more. Kids, they're the worst. So I'm going to cut this about 1 3/4 inches. But what I was saying is a lot of the machines you can still get this kind of cording foot for, and it's a foot that's got a channel underneath it so that the cording lays down exactly. It lays down exactly where you want it to. So I just folded this over on itself, and the first thing I'm doing is cutting off the fold. And I'm going to do about 1 3/4. If you've got a shredsy fabric, you can also, when you make your piping, serge it together. But this stuff isn't very shredsy. And I'm going to just lay it right on there. Okay, so let's go over to the machine. And I think I'll do both of these so I can show the stopping and starting, which looks nice. And then we'll make a piece of this fluff. I'll show you how we made that fluff, which we've recently used also on another costume. I got a dog on my chair. See, I brought everybody today. I just couldn't bear leaving anyone at home. It's because I had such a good parking spot in front, and it was so easy to drag all the dogs with. Oh, except I don't know how to plug in the sewing machine. Oh, for Pete's sake. There we go. We've got power. So let me show you how I like to lay down the piping for stuff. So this foot, it's got a channel underneath it where the cording lays right into the channel. So like you can make the piping as you sew the piping. And I do know that other domestic machines make a foot that has a channel in there. I've seen feet like for putting pearls on, like putting pearls or different kind of like passementerie trims on. If it's got a channel under it, that one should also work. But let me show you what I like to do at the shoulder and at the hem. So we don't want the piping getting folded up later and being, well, it'll get somewhat folded up, but our goal is to keep the piping out of some of the seam allowance. So instead of starting the piping right at the very edge, I'm going to start it a little bit inside of where the intersection of the shoulder is. So I'm going to take my piece of bias and I'm going to lay my cording inside of it. And then, and I'll hold this back up after I do it. Instead of starting all the way up at the top, I'm going to run my needle onto it a little bit below the intersection, and then I'm going to turn the piping onto my seam, and I'm going to pipe it as I go. But you could definitely make the piping first and then stitch it on. It's all correct. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just run my needle up to the intersection, and then I'm going to lay my piping a little bit to the inside of it. You know, I usually go like a quarter, so it's definitely out of the way. Then as soon as I've run onto the piping, I'm going to bend it, my piping and my bias. I'm going to bend them back on the track, you know, if this is like a train track here. Then I'm using the line that I've already stitched to line up my cording and to line up the foot. So it's happening all at once. Now, if you think this is a spot where you're going to take off the piping, you can choose to make the piping first. Like there's no right or wrong way. I like to lay it down as I sew because generally it comes out more even than if you sew, because like when you sew it once, you kind of anchor the bias and the cording together, so it's a little less flexible. But when you do it all at once, it retains its stretch a little bit, and you can get really, really nice edges. And the bottom of this is going to get piped in pink. No, it's going to get piped in the other blue. I lied. The bottom gets piped in like the pale teal. So now as I'm approaching my bottom, I'm going to do what I did at the shoulder, and I'm going to move this totally out of the way. So right like a quarter inch before I'm to the intersection, I'm going to take this and bend it completely out of the way so that when it joins the next piece by it, it doesn't have, you don't have so much bulk in the intersection there. And let me hold this up so you can see what I did. So see, there's the edge. There's the top edge of my shoulder. The pin, that's my intersection, but I actually ran the piping on a little bit below that. Oh, hush, everybody. I don't get it. I'll have to give everybody a dog discount coupon. So see, look how nice that looks. So when my shoulder goes together, I don't have that thick piece of piping that's also got to get folded back. In fact, you can come in here and find right where the cording is sticking out of your piping and cut it off. So you've got no thickness, no extra thickness getting added into that equation. And then see how the piping just bends right into there and looks so super duper nice. Let's lay this on the front. Can you hand me the front that's right there? Just so we can kind of see. I said I was going to do both sides. I'm just doing one side. So then this will get basted on. So I'll finish pinning my crisscrosses on and baste them down first. And the top edge of this, we're going to pipe in white. We'll pipe the top of this in the blouse fabric. And this itty little bit at the bottom, we'll probably just run across it with the blue. So this is going to get seamed together. The center front is going to get seamed with my middle front and side fronts. And then we'll just pipe across the whole bottom at once. So even though we're making the illusion of the blouse, we're going to cheat a little bit. But look how great this is going to look with just that skinny, 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 slim piece of color up against the blouse. It looks more expensive than if we'd piped it in the lighter color. So that's where this sucker's at. Let's make some of this trim that is running around the skirt. So I don't need the piping foot now, the cording foot. And if you have an industrial machine, you can get the cording foot in a whole bunch of different diameters, like super thin, super fat. There's like that piping that's huge. You can even get a cording foot for that. So what this is, these are, I believe, 3-inch wide strips. These are 3-inch wide strips, and it's super bouncy, and they're cut on the bias, because you get more of a wavy edge. And then we're just using craft yarn, which, oh good, it's pulling from the middle, maybe. It's pulling from the middle, kind of. Right, I picked craft yarn with little bumps of color on it. It could have been easier without the bumps of color. So what I'm gonna do is, to keep the edge extra wavy, I'm actually gonna stretch the bias, which is something we tell you usually not to do. I'm going to stretch the bias as I sew the yarn on, and that will like emphasize the wavy, wavy edge. So I need a zigzag. And I want kind of a small stitch length. So I'm going to try it on a 2, because we're kind of like pinching the fabric together. Here, zoom in on this for just a second. Let's see if I can even do it right. Somebody else did all of this. So make a few practice ones. So what I want to happen is that the sewing machine is turned on. I want my width to actually kind of be scrunching in the silk or whatever material you're using. So and then see, I'm stretching the silk. So that'll make it wavy. Pretty good. My zigzag could be a little bit closer together. So I'm going to shrink my length even a little bit more. And we want to kind of pinch the silk. See, what it's doing is it's scrunching the silk along the edge, and that also helps keep this wavy look. And if you have yarn without slubs, it just looks like a really nice finished rolled edge or pearl edge. So you just kind of experiment. Try different lengths and widths, but see how it's starting to already curl? That's what we're trying to make it do. So with my left hand, I'm stretching out the bias and sewing the yarn right on the edge. And you'll see that the yarn like shows more on one side than the other. So you kind of want to watch and decide what your right side is when you're getting there. So that, actually, why don't I just go to the end, because I'm almost at the end. Then I'll show you the other thing we did. So this is a repeat from the last page to stage, this yarn stuff. But I have a feeling I'm going to be doing it a lot because I think it just is so cool. It'd be fun to do it with super skinny strips, you know, and really put them close together. Actually, if anybody knows the Elphaba dress, the black dress that she wears in Wicked, it's rows and rows and rows of bias like this, with the edge slightly stretched and finished, and then soft pleats put in it. So in a way, this is kind of what they did on the Elphaba dress. So right now we've got this wavy piece, And then we want to put some irregular pleats in the edge. Because if you put regular pleats, you're never going to get them just right. So what I like to do is to put like a little single pleat, sew a little bit, maybe put 2 little single pleats, 2 right next to each other. Let me straighten the second one out. Sew a longer distance, put a single pleat, maybe put 3 single pleats. It's just so that like if you can, sometimes if you can like embrace that something's irregular, repeating something that's irregular will make it look regular. I hope that doesn't frustrate anybody. That's like a lot of times I say, make it evenly unsymmetrical or symmetrically unbalanced. Like, you know, that's one of those artsy phrases, but it can be done. And we don't want them all close. Like, it's okay to have a gap, have a straight path, because that's why, another reason why we already made the edge kind of wavy. So all these little irregular pleats just start to make this really, really, really fun treatment. And then, like when you're bending this around the top plate, around those shapes. So if you're running it in big circles or big ovals around a top plate, you won't run into this problem. But say we're bending this into like our teardrops like we did, and it wants, like if your edge is laying too flat in a spot, as you're sewing it on, just add a pleat so that you can get around the corner. So the more pleats you have around the tight part, the easier it is to go around. Oh, the hand sewing needle showed up. So I added 2 little pleats to make my teardrop shape. Whereas if I get rid of those 2 little pleats, I've got a spot that doesn't really want to fit around a corner. So if it feels like you want to add a little pleat, go for it. And that's another nice thing about leaving gaps every now and then, is you can kind of control where the pleats are going. But when you've got rows and rows and rows of this, it's really fun and looks really super cool. This would even be a nice treatment on the hems of party girl or party mom dresses, to have like 3 rows of this and then a piece of trim covering it up to make kind of a flounce without it being like a flamenco dress flounce or something. Okay, let's start tacking this tutu. And then we'll have a final check-in tomorrow with everything more done or almost done. And for the new folks, I'm going to send everybody the link for the hook and bars by machine. So I'm going to get really close. Maybe, is it better if I go on the other side of you? Or should you just be over my shoulder? What do you think is better? We'll just start and then we'll adjust if we need to adjust. Okay. So actually, let me go get that fine line tape really quick and some safety pins. I started to show this yesterday, but I want to re-show what I was talking about. Do some of that, some of this. Okie dokie. So I wonder if I should lower the ironing board a little bit too, because this is kind of high. Let me lower the ironing board a little bit. Is that as low as it goes? No, I think it goes lower. We'll find out. It might just go down to the floor. That's good. Is that a better height for looking? Too low for you? No, this is fine. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is when this is all getting tacked, 2 things have to happen. We don't want the waist we don't want the high hip to grow bigger than it should be. So I'm going to take a piece of tape, just a piece of grosgrain ribbon or hug snug or something that doesn't grow. And I know that her high hip is 30 inches. So I'm going to cut this like 31 inches and overlap an inch. Now, you can also tack the tutu with the bodice or basque already on it. So if the basque was already sewn to this, this wouldn't be a problem. But the way we're gonna kind of sneak the top plate on is it's gonna kind of feed underneath the bodice. So we're gonna tack this first, then we can put the top plate on and then the bodice. So what I'm gonna do is close the center back. So we got our hook in there closed, but then I wanna close the center back where it truly closes, like that, so that we've got control here. And then I'm gonna kind of find the front. So remember the other day we started back stitching this tulle on. It's all back stitched on now. And then you just keep dividing the ribbon. And it looks like we haven't stretched anything out to this point, which is great. So in sewing the netting on, in back stitching this top thing on, it hasn't grown. So right now, if the panty was larger than your piece of twill here, you're gonna just scrunch the panty onto the twill because you don't want to encourage it to get bigger while you're steaming and tacking it. And while you're steaming and tacking it is where it definitely can get bigger. So I would put quite a few pins in this till it's anchored in, but I'm gonna just the rest of this just kind of divide it in half and say we're good to go. That's my pin where I overlapped the ribbon. But the good news is we haven't stretched the panty out. And the other good news is if you had stretched the panty out, when you put this on here and start steaming it and stuff, the panty and the netting will start to relax back to this size. I've even had ones that were pretty stretched out and I pin the ribbon on it and just leave it overnight. And by morning, it's kind of like pulled itself back to what you want it to look like. And the other thing is you can do this, you can tack the whole tutu on a dress form, which is great because you have legs and a crotch in the tutu. But since a lot of folks don't have a dress form with legs, this is the reason we like to show this method. You can also make a butt or buy a butt to stick in there, a little stand. And actually this is how I have pretty much always done it, is you want to put a couple towels in the shape of your oval, right? Don't make your towel a circle. So we're kind of simulating a butt. Because what'll happen is if you tack all of this down without something giving a little resistance or push against the panty, and I'm not stuffing it so that I'm making the panty huge. I'm just kind of pretending that there's a girl in there. What'll happen is if you tack this with nothing in there, it'll all be great and nice and flat. And then as soon as you put something in there, what happens is the netting will all buckle in like that because the shape of the inside has changed a lot. And then all of a sudden it doesn't fit. Okay, so let me get the iron. And we tack by hand and sometimes use hand and a little bit of gun. And what I've got is an elastic loop. I've got an elastic loop that's going to hold some of my layers up. Because the first thing I'm going to do is shove a hoop in here. Yeah, okay. So what I normally do is, this tulle, he's something that's meltable. The tulle layer, if I let the iron linger on it, it's just going to melt and cause all kinds of problems. So I'm going to first take the tulle and get it completely out of the way. In fact, I might tie it with a separate something just so that the tulle is kind of held up. So I'm going to just tie up my tulle first, and we're going to deal with the tulle last. But then before I shove the hoop in, I like to kind of pre-steam it somewhat. So I'm gonna just kind of pull as many of the edges as I can out with my hands. And we've got this rotating ironing board. There's directions on our webpage, and I think it says like free and fun stuff. I'm gonna just kind of work on half of this for now, because I can also sense the iron is running out of steam. So I pre-steam a section of this. And this, like, I'm not going for finished here. I'm just going to kind of get it started. And then, so I would steam all the way around to kind of control all that. Then I like to give just a little bit of steam to the bottom side. So we're gonna just kind of work on that half. And same thing, like before I start to steam it, I can kind of start to arrange, you know, stuff gets folded weird while it's sitting on the table or sitting underneath your table. I can start to straighten out this stuff. And we've got our split in the back where all the netting meets. We'll be tacking across the back to hold that closed. And then I like to give a little bit of steam on the underside just to start getting things cooking. And on the diamond net, the nylon, so we're using an iron that generates steam in a boiler rather than a steamer, because I find with a steamer, I have to go over it so many times to try to get the steam down into the tutu, where this kind of blasts the steam, and I can really start to shape it and get in there. Okay, so we would go around the whole thing. Go around the whole sucker to just kind of pre-steam it a little bit. Start to make it look a little bit better. But we're not going totally nuts yet, because we're gonna put the hoop in next. So I like to, so I give it a little steam. I'm gonna just kind of demonstrate this all on one half, but you'll do it to the whole thing. So now that we've given that a little steam, we're gonna tie up everything that's above the hoop layer. Ooh, Jared, do you know where the tape is in that top drawer? On the far right, there's white electrical tape. Will you grab me some white electrical tape? Okay, so we're just gonna keep bunching this up. And since we did give it a little bit of steam, you know, we're not gonna like twist it around a ton, but that first little bit of steam is just to kind of warm it up and get us going. So the next thing we're gonna do is put the hoop in. So we're gonna get all of that out of the way. And I've got hooping from hoopwire.com. We just absolutely love that they're making that stuff again. And you can use it. Oh, it got chewed on by a dog. Imagine that. Here's your new tutu with some dog chew on it. Did I bring those great big pliers over here? I don't know where I just had them. They might, oh, they're on the other ironing board. So the steel hoop comes with 2 bands of steel, and you can use it double or single. Since this isn't a great big heavy partnered thing, this is more for like fashion, this tutu. That's great. I'm just using a single band of the steel. We cut it right in half. But for most stuff, a double band is great because it will keep its shape and last a long, long time. And then the other magic tool is a pen cap. So I'm gonna find my center back. I've completely lost it. And so remember our hoop layer, we stitched 2 layers together to make a casing to put the hooping in. So we're sliding this between 2 layers up against a stitch. And I don't like the hoop to press all the way to that stitch. I like it to be about a 1/2 inch or 1 inch inside of that stitch, because I find if you get the hoop too tight, that's when it starts to look like a Pringle or a Dorito or some sort of chip. It's a Pringle. It starts to look like, no, a Ruffles chip. It kind of gets the shape of a Ruffles chip, like a little curved, but not quite like a Pringle. So you just keep working this around. Until you get back to the beginning, or actually we're at the end now. You're going to take the pen cap off and just pull out a little more than you need. So right now this is all scrunched up. I've pulled it all, I've like gathered it in with the hoop. And before I decide where I'm taping off or finishing my hoop, I'm going to start to kind of go around it and start bringing the hoop closer to the edge. So right now my hoop is like about 3 inches from that casing, from the edge of that stitch. I want it to be about 1 inch or 1/2 of an inch. So I'm going to just start zhuzhing this. We actually found how to spell zhuzh a couple weeks ago, and now I can't remember. It's a real word. Z-U something, right? Oh, I caught the yarn. So now I can see where I need a little more hoop shoved in there. So I'm just going to shove it in and keep working it around until I can get it about the distance I want from the edge. The other cool thing with a hoop is if you've got a tutu that's too perky, if your tutu is too flat and there's a hoop in it, you can go in and shrink the hoop and that will angle the tutu down towards the floor. So if you've got a hoop in there making a really flat tutu, but you decide you want to make it have kind of more angle from the hips out downward towards the floor, you can just shrink the hoop and that will make that happen. So now I'm about 1 inch-ish from the edge. So I'm happy with that. And I like to overlap about 8 or 10 inches of hoop so that if she puts this on or somebody else is wearing it and you're like, I wish it were a little flatter, you can actually lengthen the hoop inside there and that will cause it to flatten up a little bit, like jacking up a car. Great big pliers. These are like Gerber brand or something. But to figure out what pliers to like cut boning and spiral boning, I just took pieces of stuff to the hardware store and started cutting boning with it. I don't know who we credit the white electrical tape to. I think Irma, but so then you want to just tape around both edges of this stuff. You can also get connectors for the hoop. I haven't tried it, but maybe I should. Another thing that some folks will use if they think the hoops are coming out or getting adjusted, you can get like clear aquarium tubing, like clear plastic, and shove the hoop. You know, you use the clear aquarium tube like something to shove each side of the hoop into. And it doesn't really slip around much once you get this all tacked together. And I like to do both ends. Sometimes I'll do both ends in the middle. And the hooping at hoopwire.com, they've also, I think, have instructions on how you can tint it and dye it. We'll dye it sometimes with RIT dye, like to make it either pink or blue. Sometimes you've got a black tutu. We'll tint it gray so that it shows up a little bit less. Okay. So the next thing after that is I'm going to go back now and give it another steam. And I'm kind of pushing it down towards the ironing board a little bit as I go, because I want it to have a little bit of a dip. I don't want this to be completely flat out from her hip. I want it to angle down a little bit. So I'm kind of starting to make that happen. And then the way we're going to tack this is new to some folks, but a lot of you have done this with me before. I just had my great big old needle. There it is. What we're going to do, this is kind of like a combo of some really old tutus I've gotten to see and kind of a few other big companies. It's like kind of a combination of a few things. So what I find is if you just do a whole bunch of single tacks everywhere, hoop or not, what happens is that the netting can still grow on the outside. And when the netting when you can make the circumference bigger here than where it lives in the world, then you start to get duck butt and tutus that dip the whole way around. So we're going to do a great big cross stitch right through the middle of the tutu to keep it from growing, to keep the circumference from enlarging. So it's kind of like we're making like the abdomen core of the costume first. Then we're going to put some single tacks to hold everything else down. So I'm going to be tacking a whole bunch first. I'm going to be tacking the 2 layers that make my hoop. I'm going to catch 2 layers below it and 2 layers above it. So we're going to start off by hooking 6 layers together, which is a lot, but it works really, really well. And I've been doing it for a while without complaints from performers, and it looks good on stage. Like it's not too flat and it's not too bouncy. So I've laid down 2 more layers over my hoop. The first thing we are going to do is tame those layers, and I'm going to just tame half of this. So as you're steaming too, right, like you'll have big folds and little folds, or big pleats and little pleats, or fat gathers and little gathers. You want the netting to kind of overlap on itself some, but if you're getting a spot where it's like a ton overlapped, as you're steaming, you just start to use your hand to adjust the amount that's overlapped. So like right here, I've got this kind of big fold. I'm going to just kind of divide it in half with my hand. Some big folds are still good. You want it to look homemade, and you want it to look like a tutu, but you also want it to look like a pro did it. So you kind of find the balance. And I think having some of those overlaps helps hold the outside edge up. If you get it all completely itty bitty overlaps, you lose a little bit of the support. So kind of a combo of the two is what you're going for. Okay, now we'll see how well the white on white shows here. I think it's going to show. You might have to zoom in a little bit here in a minute. Let me find my needle again. There it is. And we use these big doll making needles that you can get at Joann's and all kinds of places. And then we're using pearl cotton, and this is number 5 pearl cotton on a spool. You can also get it in skeins. So I'm measuring off a bunch of it. And I'm going to work with it doubled because we're sewing a whole bunch together. So I've got a big long piece of doubled pearl cotton. And I've got my hoop layer, 2 layers above it and 2 layers below it. And here's a great time, because we're sewing with netting, where it's like good to make a big, ugly, nasty knot, because we don't want it to pull through the netting. So like the grossest, thickest knot you can make, now's the time for it. It looks like 2 boogers having a party. So I'm going to work from left to right, and we're going to do a great big cross stitch. But what I'm going to be doing is catching these 2 layers to my 2 hoop layers, and I'm going to catch just a little bit of the 2 layers underneath it. And I don't want it to be super tight. I want it to have a little bit of puff in it, because what happens if you tack your tutu like you want it to look when you're all done, by the time she rehearses in it, it's a dead lampshade. So you need to leave some of the space in there, some of the air, like a honeycomb. Oh, and actually we're at the center back. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of collect my back, right? I've got a gap in the back. I'm going to just kind of overlap my back layers and just make a loop. So I'm going to just start by, so I've just overlapped some of my back. I'm going to do that. And even though we made that big horrible knot, I'm going to make a loop and tie a knot, because we don't want this to come apart. And what's nice about this buried cross stitch is if they're partnered, the guy should never be able to get his hand in here. So what I'm going to do now, it's like about feeling. So I'm feeling that I've got my left hand underneath my hoop layer, the layers under my hoop layer. And you can do less layers than this. 6 is kind of a bit, but I'm able to make it work, and I want to show you that. So now we're going to just start working the cross stitch around, and I'm kind of like paying attention to a lot of stuff. I'm paying attention to my hoop layer, my layers above it, and my layer below it. And I'm going to do this great big cross stitch on either side. So the hoop is here. I'm going on either side of the hoop. And I'm using my left hand to see that I'm getting to the layers below the hoop. And you want to leave this kind of loose. If you make it tight, the netting will start to stand up like that. So if your netting is starting to stand up, your tension is a little bit tight. So we continue around. Oh, I just made a knot. We continue around like this. And if you think it's too tight, you're doing it too tight. And then you just kind of keep arranging stuff as you go. And the nice thing with the two layers of, or the two strands of cotton, is if one of them busts, you've got another one in there. And the other thing I like to do is, like, every 3 or 4 stitches, I like to tie a knot and keep my thread connected. I'm not going to cut the thread. I'm just going to tie a single knot so that if it does both break somehow, it's not going to all unravel. And kind of like the back stitch that we did when we hooked the tulle to the waist, the cross stitch also, it's more likely to kind of like want to stop unraveling because it goes forward and backward. You know, it like goes against the direction we're sewing. So it will want to kind of like loosely knot itself off instead of unravel forever. So let me do one more of those. And you can start to see that we've, oh, I moved it. You can start to see that we're controlling a lot of material really fast. And you can see on the underside that, well, it's kind of hard to see, but see, I've got little loops catching through several layers underneath, and they're quite hidden. So it's nicer, this looks nicer than tons and tons of knots on the underside, okay? So let me do like one more cross stitch, then we'll lay a little bit more down. So we're hooking 5, 6, 7, 8, and 3 and 4 all together at once, which is super great. Then we're going to come back up here. When I first started doing these, I always would sew from the underside first, and I would sew layers 1 to 2, and then I would sew 2 to 3 and 4, and then I would sew 4 to 5 and 6, 6 to 7 and 8, and so on. But after making lots and lots and lots and lots of these, this is kind of the approach I've come up with that I like the most. So we've got our cross stitch in there, which is holding our guts together. Then we're going to give that another little bit of steam. Then we're going to lay down our next layer. And actually, we could lay down our next net one and our tulle one. So it's up to you how many things you want to tack down at once. There's no correct way to do it. So the more tacks you have, the flatter your tutu is. And probably the more separate layers you lay down, the more control you've got shaping it and getting the layers nice and even. So it's really something you should play with, and it's something fun to switch from time to time. Like, try it differently every now and then you'll kind of discover stuff. So now the tulle, although still nylon, is very thin and will melt if we put the iron directly on it for too long. So on the tulle, You want to move much, much, much faster, and don't let the iron rest on it. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to give this some steam. I'm going to tack my tulle layer to my dyed net layer to my next layer underneath it. So I'm going to be tacking the top 3 together. And you got to move fast with this. A press cloth for this is also a good idea. But you just want to barely touch the iron to it. And on some irons, not this one, I know you're able to like turn the heat on the plate off but still have steam. I don't know which one it is, but I've been to a camp where somebody had one, and I remember that being pretty great. But as long as you move quick, you're all right. Or for the tulle, you may want to just grab your steamer so that you're not worried about trashing it with the iron. So let's get about half of this done. And the tulle is super full. Like we did like eight widths of 54. So it's real, or something like that. And look how pretty our semi-ombre thing is turning out. Mm-hmm. So let me get a little more thread. So we're going to tack, I'm going to show you the tacks for a little bit of this, the top side, and then we're going to flip it over and I'll show you where we would put tacks on the underside. And then we'll see how much more little pieces we got put together and finish her up tomorrow. This stuff splits and it's hard to thread when it splits. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to do, you can do separate little tacks. So I figured out from making a bunch of these, actually at the Joffrey, we were timing how long it takes, Lavinia, who was a worker there, we were timing how long it takes to put your needle down, put your scissors down, and pick it all back up. And it added tons of time to this process. So what we came up with there was that you thread in a bunch of tacks and then cut and sew them. So I'm going to do it where I've got little knots kind of hidden in the tulle and tied on top. If you didn't want, because we're putting that top plate over this, right? That purple top plate. If you didn't want the little knots to show, you can do a couple things. You can bend the layer back like that and tack it on the inside and tie your knot so your knot is hidden between a couple layers. Or you can tack this side completely from the underside so that your knots are all underneath. But since this is getting a top plate, I'm not going to stress out about it. So what I'm going to do is I'm catching my tulle to the layer under it and the layer underneath that. So I'm catching like 3 layers. And I've got a single strand now of the pearl cotton. And what I'm going to do is make a really loose running stitch. So we call this threading the tacks. So I'm going to go quite a ways around with a really loose running stitch that in a minute we're going to cut apart. Another thing you could do is do a row far to the edge that's really spaced out, you know, like maybe 8 or 10 inches apart. And then you can come back and do another row like Chorus Kids in the Window that's higher up in between this. It really just depends on how flat you want this to get. So you would thread all your tacks in one move. Then what you've got to do is figure out how to hold your scissors so that you don't have to set them down. So then we're going to go back to the beginning, right? So we've got a running stitch in there. Then I'm going to cut in between stuff. And I like to roll it around my finger and pull it through. And you don't want it to be super duper tight. See how there's room in that loop above the knot? You want to leave some room. And then you actually don't want to cut the knot super close. I cut the knot with like 1/4 of an inch left over. So we're going to go to the next one. See, I don't set the scissors down. You could do it. It's kind of like a pinkies width loop is generally good for almost everybody. The bigger the loop you leave, the more bounce your tutu will have. The more tacks you put, the less bounce it will have. And the tighter your tacks are, the less bounce it will have. But I like it when the girls jump that it moves just a little bit. I don't like those completely flat, rigid ones. I think it kind of goes against the the movement of their body. I think it's nice. Like you don't want it to go full bam and be completely bouncy, but it's nice that there's a little bit of movement. So look how quick that is to just work your way around when you don't set your scissors down. If you were hiding the knots between layers, it's going to take longer and you're going to have to set your scissors down. But this way works pretty great. Then let's flip it over. So you would continue around, steam all of that, continue around, but you can start to see we're getting quite a bit hooked together there. But now we've got to hook some of our short ones in. So we're going to flip this over. And then the next thing we're going to do, here's where we're more tacked together. So here's our section where we've got our hoop hooked to a layer below it, the layers above it, and to the top. But what's not hooked together right now is layer 1 and 2. They're not hooked to anything. They're completely loose. This is a spot where sometimes we will use a price tag gun or a buttoneer, but you can also thread the knots in here too. So we've ruffled 1 and 2 together. So layer 1, he stays pretty tucked into 2. So I never, the way we do it, I never feel a need to put tacks in layer 1. But I'm going to go through 2. I'm going to put my needle into 2, and I'm going to catch all the way to 3 and 4. So I'm going to hook 2 to 3 and 4. And I would do just like we did on the top. Well, I don't have a great big long piece of thread. I'm hooking 2 into 3 and 4, about every 2.5 or 3 inches. Then I'm going to come back and do the same thing. Oh, I picked up a pen. And I'm going to cut in between and tie and then trim my knot. So the tacking is just kind of like the more tacks you put, the flatter it will be. The less tacks you put, the less flat it will be. And I've read stuff where people are like, I put 6,000 tacks in this. I often think they're not telling the truth. So it doesn't, like, the amount doesn't matter. It's like whether you've done what needs to be done is what matters. That's a good Stuart answer. Have you done what needs to be done? Then when you're more done, so we haven't done this whole thing, right? There's sections of this that have no tacks at all, but sections of it are really nicely tacked. The last thing I do is I kind of hold it over my head and bounce it a little bit and see where there's big spots. So right, we haven't tacked most of this. Most of this has no tacks. And then the other thing you can do is hold it upside down. This is the spot we haven't tacked. You can see where we start tacking more. You can hold it upside down and go, whoop, I need some more tacks there. And then you can just kind of dot in a few extras. I think it's better to have to add some tacks than to having over tacked it. And definitely a lot of folks say they finish these and they put them under a mattress at night. It might look really nice and flat, but it's certainly not going to look like a beautiful tutu when you get to the show. Now, if she's performing in it tomorrow and she's going to wear it one time in her whole life and you want it super flat, sure, put it under a mattress, flatten it out, and then it's done for. But the other thing, this is something that we would do in Omaha. When we had them pretty much tacked together, we would take a wool blanket and lay a great big, so the wool blanket's kind of heavy, right? So after we had them tacked, we lay a wool blanket over the whole tutu. So imagine this is covering the whole tutu. Then we would just kind of warm it up with a little bit of steam once. Actually, we did this in Houston too. with 2 towels seamed down the middle, I think is what we use. You can give that a little bit of steam and then just let it spend the night like you're setting your hair to get up in the morning. And the other thing that you can think about is if you want more angle coming down, if you want the center of your tutu higher and the bottom lower, you can also pin this to your ironing board or put some weights around the outside edge just to kind of start training that angle in, and leave it overnight, and you'll be surprised how great the shape looks in the morning. So it's kind of like setting your hair. You know, tie your hair in flannel. And see, you can even see just that little section that we did is already starting to get an angle towards the ironing board. And then something else that reminds me of, at Houston, we made a whole different sets of like kind of shaped donuts, where sometimes as we were working, we would put a big donut in the middle, and or just a pillow, a round pillow, pin the tutu to that, pin that to the board, so that you have more room to start making an angle. So if I wanted this to look like an English tutu, I might stand up the middle some, and then I've got more real estate, more space going down to start angling this down. Okay, so that's just other things to think about. Can you do something to help you make the shape as you're working? So if I was making this look like an English bell, I could hook this up here, and as I'm tacking it, I might actually push it down to do my tacks to start to give it that more of a bell shape rather than, you know, a slightly flat shape. That's where we're going to leave you today. Thank you, everybody, tons. We will be back for everyone tomorrow, or it might just be me and Jared, but you get the video anyway. And the dog quieted down, so that's good. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye. I love looking at myself. It's just the funnest.